the reading is basically a program of life on the indwelling, and I would just like to pause for a few minutes on this actualization of what is potentially always there but rarely thought about. You have been spending a good while now in adoration of the Blessed Sacrament exposed, and therefore aware, probably intensely aware, of the reality of that presence. For in the silence of adoration one feels a lot more than in the noisiest, sometimes, exteriorization of praise. Why? Because the Lord is able himself to act without intermediary. But we forget that we are also tabernacles. I would like just for a second to dwell on two linked issues with regard to that indwelling. The first is the way that we use those few minutes after receiving a sacrament, where grace is fully and maximally operative in the soul. Recently, it has been brought to my attention that a very large, and a surprisingly large, proportion of people in Ireland, immediately after Holy Communion, go out of church. And it is perhaps something that we as pious souls are not fully aware of, because we are up front and not seeing what's going on behind us. But if one goes into a church and stays in the door area, one will be often quite horrified to see how the Lord is not well received. Unfortunately, the paradox is, from what I can make out, that even at the Eucharistic Congress itself, which was there to honour and place in evidence the splendour and grandeur of the Most High in his gift of his body and blood in the Blessed Sacrament, that was going on there too, which shows how poor a notion one has of what we're actually doing in adventures of this sort, unless it is preceded by a very profound catechesis, because the spectacular passes, catechesis remains until death and changes life. So I wanted just for a second to dwell on this fact, that for a few minutes, until the sacred species becomes our own, that is transformed into our own body, then we are just as much as the tabernacle or the monstrance containing the Blessed Sacrament. And at that point, the Lord is coming with a great proposal of intimacy and possible inspiration. In a monastic setting, that, thank God, is still well preserved. A convent or a monastery of contemplative prayer does tend to do that bit of the day fairly well. There's a calm in the contemplative celebration, which in a parish one perhaps cannot find easily. And the result is that if one is well educated from the postulancy onwards, one gets into that mode of never ever wanting to do a single thing for that sacred part of the day except be with. And one goes into a monastery and observes how spontaneously people either inquire, go into mode, on their heels or whatever posture might be most comfortable, or drift towards a side chapel, and as St. Thomas à Kempis says, enjoy your God. They just want to be with him for whom they have given all. For if that is not happening, there is no point in entering the contemplative life. one can work well elsewhere. But the same thing tends to be there in any soul genuinely in love with the Lord, because the Lord from within pulls and invites, and therefore they too will do the maximum to protect that encounter. For the same reasons as a young couple sometimes prefer to be alone. Two's company, three's a crowd. Hence, if there are no times of intimacy with him, we are too much involved with things for him. And a prayer group has to have that element of all going in one direction and being so relaxed that the others don't get in the way. If one has a prayer group of that nature, it is a God-given gift, because the Lord has done it himself, forming in parallel different souls. If it happens in a marriage relationship, it is even more precious, because there the grace of the sacrament of marriage is used to the full, and one has what John Paul II referred to as a domestic church. And any children growing up there will feel it and be tranquilized by passing grace. So that's the first part, that we safeguard the encounter by having the instinct to remain just there and letting other things wait their time, while we are tabernacles of the Most High. The second is, and this also in the monastic life one does tend fairly early on to catch on to, because not much happens in the realm of talking, therefore the presence is felt for a long time. And that element of the actualization of what is then a spiritual presence, for once these species have become our own, the injection of divine grace, so to speak, then invites us to actualize the fact that we are inhabited, that we have the living God in our soul. And that does not then become from one moment to the other a second compartment. It's one linear movement, presence felt, adored and loved. In the specific case of the monastic life, the simplicity of monastic work invites towards that, as does quietness of study of the things of the Lord. It's one linear movement. Therefore, I would invite you, as inhabited souls, to do under your own modalities a bit of the same. If one is at home, on one's own, it can be easily done. E.g., turning off things which might obstruct it, unnecessary transistors or whatever. If one is with other people, it is not quite so simple, if those people are not in a state of grace and peace. There are dynamics in the air which can almost contaminate, but certainly complicate our own. But if we are truly aware that ontologically we are inhabited, we can do it, because the reality is there. The problem is thinking about it and avoiding the damage of our situation. E.g., we don't have to get involved with every conversation around us, or to make it 100% conversation. One can be passive at times, and thereby not miss the intimacy. We don't have to say all that has to be said. I'll leave you with those two thoughts then, for if we do those two things, which are all one in their movement, we will be putting into practice this gospel of remaining in him and he in us.